Hey everyone, CODI here with a new video, and in this one I'm entirely stealing an idea from at NL_MM2916, video linked in the description, and giving up my rankings for the top 5 ShiboYugi playing death game to put food on the table light novel volumes. For the uninitiated, ShiboYugi, as I'll be referring to the series in this video, is a light novel series turned manga turned anime adaptation currently airing as this video is being made. Currently, only the first 5 of 9 ongoing are translated into English, and since I know mucho poquito Nihongo desu, I will be awaiting the rest of the translations. Or maybe I'll sail the 7 seas in an effort to continue the series before the official translation, which of course I won't at all even consider, and I do not at all recommend doing. I've obviously read all 5 of these volumes myself, I own physical copies of them, and I have the unique distinction of having finished each and every volume in one sitting. Like, separately. I've read one per sitting, not all 5 back-to-back in one, that's insane. Lastly, for the prelude, this video will contain spoilers. In an ideal world, I would talk around them, but I really want to get into the meat and potatoes here, so you've been warned. And also, yes, I am 100% stalling on the January Media Mosaic video. I should realistically be doing that, but this video is already scripted, so I'm going to do this one instead. The January Media one is going to be late. Apologies. The worst ShiboYugi volume for me ends up being Volume 3. This is kind of a shame, because I do think it does some things right. Firstly, I like that this volume distinguishes itself from the first 2. Rather than giving us these 2 death games we've come to expect from the previous volumes to split the narrative focus, it puts all its eggs in one basket, giving us Cloudy Beach. The double-edged sword that comes attached to this, however, is the fact that if there is only going to be one game, then that game needs to be incredible. And while Cloudy Beach is by no means bad, it pales in comparison to the likes of Candlewood Scrapbuilding and Golden Bath to me. Furthermore, there is some non-game content in this volume, and it's just kind of fine. It's also short in comparison to later volumes that also focus on out-of-death game content. Yugi is obviously the best character in the volume, to which, just to get it out of the way, Yugi is the best character in the series. For me, it's not particularly a debate. Having the best showing across the entire series, although we will talk about 2 other characters who do give her somewhat of a run for her money in terms of having the best showing in an individual volume, at least. More on that later. Esse is a fine enough antagonist, but unfortunately I have in fact read Umineko no Nakokoro ni, so I had a pretty good idea about her throughout, but the twist was still alright. Maguma is fairly memorable, Airi was cool to see again, Mitsuba and Hizumi were both fun at times, though I don't think much of them really at all about being a year late out of the volume. And lastly, Koyomi is a character who is interesting, but is less interesting to me than a certain other acquaintance of Hakushi, who we will not be discussing for a while, put a pin in it. Overall, this is the worst volume for me, but it isn't bad by any means. I don't think any of the ShiboYugi volumes are bad, but something had to be the worst. Next up at number 4, I fittingly have Volume 4. I actually did debate this with Volume 3 a little bit. I think the 2 volumes here are fairly in line with one another, where both volumes settle on having one main death game with some out-of-game content beforehand, and straight up Cloudy Beach absolutely walks the floor with Halloween Night. The concept of Halloween Night is fine and fittingly pretty brutal, but the mystery element of Cloudy Beach leads me to simply prefer that one, especially when we got so much of Cloudy Beach. In this volume, the author decided to use more non-death game content than any previous volume, and I think they succeeded. I think they do it better in another volume, but it is done well here in my opinion. I think the twins of Heine and Kokone are cool. Getting to see more of Keito was fun. Hitomi was compelling throughout, and in the death games themselves, we had Tamamo, who was fun and a fantastic ending to the volume in the epilogue, and Shion, who is the worst antagonist across the novels for me up through volume 5. But whatever. Especially when it comes to the main fights in the novels between Yuki and her final opponents, Shion's definitely the worst. I will say though, on the topic of Tamamo, Tamamo aspires to be the protege of her savior, Yuki. Yuki wants nothing to do with any of that and tells the short stubby girl that she'll agree to a mentorship when Tamamo catches her. Obviously this is impossible. An impossible task that Tamamo completes in the epilogue after her dramatic physical transformation. Dude, I'm not gonna lie, dude. This shit was so funny to me. Peak ending to the volume. All in all, I do like this volume, and it does well to set up the next volume, both with Yuki's eyesight and her dynamic with Tamamo, both of which play very big roles in Volume 5. Smack dab in the middle of the list, coming into bronze, is the original volume, Volume 1. Volume 1 is iconic to me now. I think Ghost House is a fine enough introduction to the story, but I'll be honest, at the time of only reading Ghost House, Kinko was legitimately my favorite character, and I was so distressing what Yuki did to her. I still haven't forgiven her for that. Then we followed up with Candlewoods, which to me is still probably unmatched in terms of like an individual game focused arc in terms of like the actual death game itself. I love the fact that Candlewoods is this huge catastrophe in universe that we see be brought up numerous times throughout the series as far as the latest volume available right now in English. Moving back to Ghost House, I think the cast is fine, but Kinko and Aoi, to a lesser extent, are the only two non-Yuki figures who stay in my mind at all nowadays. I do like having this smaller cast, though, that can later contrast with Candlewoods, which boasts an insane 330 contestants compared to the 6 we see in Ghost House. I think doing this is phenomenal because it keeps the reader guessing in future games. Yet, even boasting such numbers, the only names in Candlewoods that really stick out now to me are Airi, Moegi, Kiara, and Hakushi. Airi is only memorable, though, for her later appearance in Cloudy Beach. Moegi is pretty rootable, which, by the way, I did write the script before, but now that I'm reading it after having watched the 8th anime episode, they really did Moegi justice for her scene at the beginning in the stumps. It was really, really well handled. But regardless, Kiara is Kiara, and Hakushi is genuinely such a fascinating presence throughout the entire narrative, and that all starts here. This idea of the series all starting here, though, does prop it up on this list, particularly owing to our introduction to our heterochromia having stoic, silver-haired, melancholic altruist we call our protagonist, Yuki Sorimachi, our introduction to the world and the bizarre features it holds like the death games themselves and the preservation treatment, and lastly, our introduction to the actual narrative structure itself. This particular aspect of the series is potentially my favorite aspect of it, aside from maybe Yuki herself, even and it's arguable, where the narrative jumps from the past to the present to the future on and on, which continues in this series, and I really like this a lot. It makes it interesting to me that once the series does wrap up, I genuinely might consider reading the series in chronological order to see how that changes my perspective on the narrative at large, and the fact that that's even an option is super cool to me. Right above it, though, at number 2, the runner-up, the penultimate entry on this list, what was my favorite volume for a while, we have Volume 2. Volume 2 is probably the best contained narrative in the series. It does a wonderful job of building up both Yuki and Mishiro that leads to its beautiful confrontation betwixt the two. Whilst Golden Bath outside of the Yuki and Mishiro confrontation is far from my favorite arc in the series, I found scrapbuilding to be super consistent, which really balances out the volume for me. Having one game that doesn't peak as high but is sprinkled with very good scenes throughout the whole thing, and another game that fails to interest me in a super consistent manner like its predecessor had, but peaks a lot higher in the end. Let's talk about the little stuff before we get into the goats, though. The cast of scrapbuilding is stronger than that of Golden Bath for me. Chie was the least compelling of the group for me, followed by Keita, who I actually did like a lot in the game and was interested to see her in later volumes. Kotoha was also really cool, and I liked that she picked up on exactly what Yuki was doing, being the only person to realize why Yuki was going out of her way to save both her and Mishiro. And sticking with scrapbuilding, I absolutely love the scene of Yuki giving up her flashlight after Mishiro attempts to strong-arm her into staying with the pack. And I also really like the floor with the beast, being a super simple concept executed really damn well in my opinion. And it's also gonna have some payoff later in the exact same volume. The atmosphere set up in the game was really well done, and the tension between Mishiro and Yuki that starts from the very beginning of the game is really well done, and as we'll see later in this volume, it is incredibly integral for the meeting of these two to have been as well executed as it was. Moving towards Golden Bath, I thought Ozuma was alright, and Riko was kind of whatever. I didn't get much from her, to be honest. Seeing Yuki play from the bottom after sleeping in even later than she normally would was really cool. I will briefly bring up the conversation between Yuki and her agent at the end of the novel, which was fine. But again, what this volume is really about is the dynamic between Yuki and Mishiro. I cannot describe how hyped I was when part 29 of the chapter simply read out, and then the two girls were reunited. That's it. The entire segment. That's 29 right there. It was fantastic. The fight between Mishiro and Yuki is one of the best the series has to offer, being a definitive top 3, for me a top 2, but one that I can easily see people claiming to be the best individual fight because it is good. It's a clash of egos, and it's better for it. I'm not going to get into Mishiro's whole strategy here for the bathhouse thing. If you want that, go watch Anime Experience Adaptation for the original series where he goes into it in episode 7. Which, side note on that, that video is so fucking funny. Go watch it. The amount of emotional weight in this fight is what puts it above the fight between Yuki and Kiara and Candlewoods for me. Where in that fight, we did see Yuki being emotional in the fight, and there was this weight on her side, but not so much on Kiara's. And while that fight is more flashy, I prefer these fights where the stakes are more equalized and more personal. Mishiro is this incredibly proud narcissist. Her ideology gets picked apart in this volume, which she outwardly strives to be a leader who impacts those who follow her, because by having that impact on others, their accomplishments are owed to her. The accomplishment of the flower field isn't owed to the seeds that sprouted them, it's owed to Mishiro who planted the seeds in the first place. I think this is really cool to see delved into, especially when it contrasts what happened with Hakushi and Yuki, whether she realizes it or not. Because as Yuki monologues in the volume, however ridiculous a goal it may be, it is far better to have one than to drift through life like I am. Despite this, in Scrap Building in Volume 2, Michiro is completely and utterly humiliated by Yuki, and with Michiro being as outwardly prideful as she is, she agrees with Yuki that it doesn't matter how ridiculous her goal is, she's going to accomplish it no matter what. And that goal is to get one up on the goddess who dared to step to Michiro's throne. Once Michiro finally sees Yuki again, she breaks down, telling her teammates that nobody gets to fight Yuki. This is Michiro's battle, and if anybody tries to get in the way, friend or foe, Michiro would not hesitate to kill them on the spot. And yet, when faced with the Phantom Girl who haunted her past, Michiro is genuinely appalled. Yuki doesn't resemble a goddess at all, just a miserable wretch. This is Michiro we're talking about. A goddess, she could lose to a goddess. But a wretch? This disgusting worm is the one who knocked her off her high horse so badly she cleared 40 games just to knock Yuki down a peg? And so, she vents her frustrations to Yuki, telling her about these games that she's cleared. And it's in that moment that everything for Yuki changes. Yuki was on the defensive for this fight, but those words changed everything. This volume has been about Yuki's paranoia about the Wall of 30, this curse that terrifies players like her so badly that they call it quits beforehand. And despite that, this snobby, uptight, asshole princess that Yuki herself humiliated not only caught up to Yuki, but surpassed her. This aspect right here, this right here, this is what makes the fight so good. Both girls here, Yuki and Michiro, have fully accepted that they will likely die in one of these death games. However, in this instant, when faced with one another, they absolutely both refuse to die here, because dying here means that the other was better. Despite how incredible that fight is, the volume at large is held back from me by the likes of Golden Bath not being particularly amazing outside of this fight, but it is still incredible stuff. Recency bias be damned, for me the best volume of ShiboYugi is Volume 5. I think Volume 5 is the perfect encapsulation of everything I love about this series. It checks every box for me, so let's get into it. The volume opens with a peek into Yuki's third game. It's a small scene though, because really all that matters here is meeting with the legendary player, Hakushi, who, after fighting and quite frankly annihilating Yuki, decides to take up the Phantom Girl as a protege. She explains to Yuki that this world necessitates bonds between mentors and proteges because of the inevitable outcome for people like them. Hakushi is going to die. She knows that just as well as anybody else in the industry. In knowing that, it's important for her to be able to pass on her wealth of knowledge to others so that they may be successful as she was. Yuki reluctantly ends up agreeing here at the end of the chapter. This small chapter really is the thesis for the entire volume. While this volume does succeed in other areas as well, I want to state for the record now that for me, this is the best introduction for any of these volumes in terms of how much of a role it plays throughout the volume, with the only introduction to Yuki and Michiro's dynamic in Volume 2 being a contender. This game also does serve as one of the checkboxes for this being an incredible volume in the series, that checkbox being more Hakushi breadcrumbs. Hakushi herself is such an enigma across the entire series. In the world itself, she's an anomaly, a player who's trying to clear 99 death games, and is a pretty damn big name in the world of ShiboYugi. She's a character wrapped in mystery, and her presence is felt throughout the narrative, none more so than in this very volume, despite the fact that we really haven't got all that much Hakushi content. Anyways, afterwards, we pick up right where we left off in Volume 4. Yuki is now in the position of mentor after Tamamo caught up to her. Yet, she's in this position, and she had no intention of being in it, and thus really doesn't know what to teach Tamamo, and ends up taking an approach where it's mostly intuitive. She does train Tamamo to get her stamina up, but it's when Yuki's running away from her, eventually succeeding in getting away from Tamamo, who had been glued to Yuki's side, only for Yuki to meet up with Hakushi about this whole conundrum. Throughout all this, Yuki is slowly but surely growing more attached to Tamamo, to a point where Yuki genuinely wants Tamamo to live, to thrive. Yet, Tamamo isn't Yuki's only worry. Throughout the more recent volumes, Yuki's eyesight is deteriorating at an alarming rate, and she brings this concern to her former mentor, only for Hakushi to tell her that she knows someone who can help. And oh boy, did that play out. We get to see Yuki and Tamamo have this really wholesome dynamic leading up to all of this, where Tamamo is genuinely trying to learn from Yuki and helping her around the house, and flipping to Yuki, who lives a rather slovenly lifestyle, embarrassed that Tamamo is helping her clean the place up and doesn't even know what to teach her, very eager to learn Tamamo. Regardless, she decides to take Tamamo with her to meet Rinrin, the contact of Hakushi, who explains that she's completely blind, and she's a player who continued to play the games afterwards, only for her to quit later on, presumably because she was blind. Rinrin then explains that the best way to learn the skills needed to be a blind player in the game is to play a game themselves, which she sets up herself, where Yuki and Tamamo need to escape the island before Rinrin prevents them from doing so by any means necessary. And yeah, no, Rinrin is out for blood here. Yuki and Tomomo escape the house and run around the island for the key and the boat, all the while being scared to death of the night. During the day, Yuki and Tomomo have an inherent advantage, sight. However, in the moonlight, that doesn't do them much good, and all of a sudden, Rinrin, who is used to fighting with a lack of visual data, has the advantage. Eventually, they find out that the key to solving the mystery is why Rinrin left the games in the first place. It's not because she's blind, but because she began going deaf as well, losing all hearing in one ear and being able to somewhat use the other with the help of a hearing aid. Everything was being told to her through another person who was staged on the island to feed her information. What becomes clear, though, throughout the narrative is that despite her giving out this big fib, she does genuinely try to get Yuki to hone in on these skills that she herself lost along the way, particularly her echolocation, which allowed her to see things that others couldn't despite being blind. We also see in this chapter Yuki attempt to save Tomomo. This is a fight between Yuki and Rinrin. Tomomo shouldn't even be here at all, and Yuki makes sure to prioritize her safety. Rinrin takes advantage of this, moving towards Tomomo to lure Yuki into a trap where she then needs to be saved by Tomomo, which happens. Lastly, Rinrin's motives are revealed. She did intend to showcase and pass on these techniques to Yuki, that is the truth, but this false game is also her swan song. Rinrin completely intends on losing the game, and not just losing, but dying in the process. She actively wants to die doing what she once loved and is no longer capable of doing, playing a death game. Which, to us, sounds ridiculous. Obviously, who would want to do this? To which I say Rinrin, but the reality is that Rinrin doesn't feel alive anymore. She's merely a husk of who she once was, and now that she's passed on her knowledge, there's no reason for Rinrin to still be here. Yuki denies this martyr approach, however. She refuses to kill Rinrin in the end because at the end of the day, even though Yuki plays these games, kills others for her goals, Yuki is genuinely altruistic. If she can clear a game with 70 people alive, she will actively strive to do that, even if it jeopardizes herself. This particular false game isn't even that. There's no reason for any of Yuki, Tomomo, or Rinrin to die, and as a result, Yuki seeks to clear this game with all three of them intact. Eventually, Rinrin loses to Yuki, falling unconscious, and Yuki steals the key from her. When arriving at the boat that will take them back home, Rinrin greets them, saying that she wants to see them off and claiming that she will, I quote, no longer torment them. Rinrin asks if Yuki learned what she wanted to, which Yuki confirms, and tells Tomomo that she will never train her the way that Rinrin did closing out this chapter, which was really great, and we get to talk about more of those checkboxes now. This overarching plot progression here is really good, where Yuki is shown adapting to her changing vision. We get a cool fight here between Yuki, Tomomo, and Rinrin, and Rinrin herself, a non-Yuki character, was really interesting and compelling to me. And then we get to the seemingly main chapter, and let me just say this outright to get negatives out of the way. I think that as a game, Royal Palace is not the most interesting in the series by a long shot. I think that Shiro's involvement in the plot is fine. It definitely could have been handled better, but I understand why she's here. Shiro is a plot device to set up the finale of the game. Again, I get her whole deal, but I do wish it was done better. With that being said, this is arguably my favorite chapter in all of ShiboYugi. This is because it's not just about the game. In fact, I'd argue that this time the game is more so background noise to Yuki and Tomomo. Throughout this chapter, we get nods to their dynamic, with constant snippets of their conversations that build up through the chapter. We see Yuki decide to throw up a wall. She bids farewell to Tomomo, the girl who completely and utterly held on to Yuki for everything, and Yuki dismissed her. Claiming that Tomomo had grown dependent on Yuki, she told herself that this was for the best, for both herself and Tomomo. And yet, immediately, she questions whether or not this was the right choice. Once the rounds of Royal Palace began, it became very clear to me how this was going to go. Yuki and Tomomo were going to fight in the finale. I don't mean to brag, but I have read Umi Neko no Naku Koro ni. You just simply know these things after that experience. Shiro gouges Yuki's good eye, leading to her needing her teammates to pick up the slack now that she's completely blind. Yet, in dire straits, Yuki takes up the reins in the final two rounds, overpowering her opponent, gaining a stronger ability to see through her blindness, and advances to the final round. Tomomo had realized who Yuki was from the very first round, telling her teammates to circle around Yuki in order to counter her, because Yuki was blind in one eye. Tomomo told the teammates to stick to that side. This is what led to Shiro making the move that she did. Yuki, through all of this, had no idea that Tomomo is even in the game, and Tomomo tells her teammates that she is the only one who can go against Yuki. We see Tomomo's thoughts about how she hates herself and attempts to dress herself up as others. Tomomo deemed Yuki as someone she outwardly needed. She was drowned in a sea of self-loathing, and so by learning from Yuki, she would be able to scrape away a small part of herself over and over again. Through this process, she would become more like Yuki and, in effect, less like Tomomo, becoming more like the mentor that she absolutely adores and less like herself who she loathes. She goes on to monologue about how this ideology is proven correct. Her time with Yuki was filled with bliss. She loved learning from Yuki, and Yuki's mannerisms, lessons, lifestyle were all overriding her own existence. Everything was going perfectly. The girl named Tamamo was going to be erased from the world, and then Yuki took all of that away in one fell swoop. Tamamo was now nothing. As she puts it, Yuki had caught on to her quote unquote shameful disposition, and it's with this knowledge that we step into the fight between Yuki and Tamamo. Yuki, who is caught off guard when Tamamo reveals it's her, and Tamamo, whose life purpose was built up and destroyed by Yuki. Throughout the chapter leading up to this fight, we see constant breadcrumbs of conversations between them. Perhaps the most important being Yuki explaining that Tamamo should take a more defensive approach when in death games, as her tenacity is what makes Tamamo such a dangerous player. The person with the upper hand in this fight changes a few times, but once Yuki has the upper hand, her psyche breaks. When she's ready to deal the killing blow, she feels a heavy weight in her arms. She immediately monologues in the first person that it must be because of all of the injuries she sustained, before having the epiphany that it isn't a physical barrier at all, it's a mental one. And when she realizes that, her monologues change from first to third person, as if Yuki is entirely detaching herself from reality, questioning what she's doing. Starting the monologue with, quote, must be my injuries, and ending with, quote, you don't want her to die. I love the discrepancy. It's such a small moment, but a genuinely really great one for me that entices me to her character even more. In the end, Yuki has her best individual moment in the entire series for me, where she breaks down in her head this internal conflict coming to fruition. Tamamo is knocked out. All Yuki needs to do is deal the killing blow, and yet she felt she was being ripped in half. Yuki throughout the series has prioritized one thing above all, her creed. Early on in her death game career, she set rules for herself to follow so that she could avoid danger later on. We see this in the very first arc, Ghost House, with that moment that I said I don't forgive her for. When they need to kill one of the four survivors, Yuki decides to kill Kinko immediately. The same girl that she herself prevented from offing herself. The girl Yuki inspired to continue living and to thrive in the outside world. All because Kinko was closest to her at the time. Not even because she was the easiest to kill. It's rules like this that define Yuki, yet here her feelings are in the way. This entire volume has been set up to the fact that Yuki genuinely cares about Tamamo. Yuki is supposed to be cold, her life is on the line, she has to follow her creed. And the fact that she's hesitating right now makes herself more upset than she has been throughout the entire series. She barages herself once again in the third person, telling herself that if she loses sight of what defines her as a player, her life will be pointless. Yuki lives for one reason, to clear 99 death games. After the mental abuse she subjected herself to, her brain becomes numb. The narration states, phrases without a clear subject raced through her brain. We then see these phrases in Yuki's mind. Die. Go away. You're the most worthless person on the planet. Don't ever try to engage with another person ever again. Die. Just die. The narration is actively lying to the reader here. Given the context of everything, there is a clear subject. Because of it being told in the third person, the natural assumption is that Yuki is referring to Tamamo. But that's not the case. No, Yuki's referring to Yuki Soremachi, the phantom player and mentor of Tamamo. Before the final moment where she kills Tamamo, blocking out the image from her own mind with the narration simply stating, she held the sword over the chest of the unconscious girl and plunged it in and plunged it in and plunged it in and plunged it in. Her memories of what happened after that were a blur. I mentioned before that this is arguably my favorite chapter in the series, and now that I've talked it through, it's not arguable. This is my favorite chapter in the series. Yes, Royal Palace, the game itself, is not my favorite, not even by a long shot, but as a whole chapter it is because I'm looking at the Royal Palace more so as background noise. I'm going to be vague here, but I really like Tamamo as a character, and I really resonate with Yuki in this chapter. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I once had someone in my life who I cared very deeply for, and still do to a different extent. This person was incredibly dependent on me, which is a really not great position to be in, where the person who I cared for, and cared for because of who they were, was slowly becoming somebody else. I eventually made the choice to separate myself from them in a way not too dissimilar. The dynamic was obviously different, but in the same way that Yuki does this seemingly out of the blue and justifies it by saying that this is what's best for both parties involved and immediately questioning if she herself even believes that, it's scarily similar to the situation that I experienced in the past. Maybe it is that resonance that keeps this chapter in as high of regard for me as it is, but I digress. we still have a little bit to go over, so let's push through. Putting everything that just happened out of her mind, Yuki arrives at her apartment where she sees a girl whose face resembles that of a phantom. The girl welcomes Yuki back, simply saying, "Can't you tell? It's me." Yuki resolves that the girl in front of her is a hallucination, because the girl in front of her is none other than the Phantom player herself, Yuki Sorimachi. I love this cliffhanger, because to me this is a manifestation of Yuki's monologues, and a direct byproduct of what we saw happen earlier. Through the series, Yugi has changed her monologue tone from first to third person to disassociate from herself. And that happens in no volume more than this one. And as a result, this third person narrator has become a literal phantom. Or at least that's my interpretation of it. But that's it. That's my ranking of every ShiboYugi volume from worst to best. I love this series, and talking through it all in one video was fun, and I'd be down to do a similar thing for other series, like ranking the Konosuba or Torture Princess light novels, maybe ranking the Cantos in Limbus Company, maybe the chapters in Punishing Grey Raven, or the arcs in Honkai Impact 3rd. Just a few ideas. Shoutouts once again to NL_MM2916 and Anime_Experience. Go check out their stuff in the description, and shout out to all of you guys for watching this video. And as always, take care, y'all.